guys already put your presentations on the computer? So everything set? So this is the last warning. You need to pay attention. After that, we have the more relaxed Fab Lab visit, if you guys want to join, from 2 to 3. And then we will have only a roundtable session at 3 to close TICYUrb' and to think a little bit about everything we just discussed on that. And I think that will be interesting. Some of the former organizers of this event will be there, so we can talk about, maybe if we have time, comparing a little bit of what they thought was good, what they thought was good to improve as well. Yesterday, actually, on the last final session, we had a complaint about not having enough sessions in English and not understanding, or not being prepared for when am I going to understand or not. And if we have 1 minute to spare, I would like to ask you guys if you agree, if you'd like us to focus more on making very clear what will be in Portuguese and what won't be in Portuguese in the future. If you guys felt the same, if you guys feel like it's nice that you felt the same. Yeah. So you felt like it wasn't enoughly announced when the sessions were going to be.
Yeah, and maybe it could be easier if there were just some section in Portuguese and the other one in English, so we can choose which one listen and which one no. Because if you don't speak Portuguese, it's impossible to understand the presentation. So when they are both in the same panel, it's quite difficult to take part of the session.
Yeah.
Actually, yours was a great example. It was in Spanish, but the slides were brilliant, and I knew exactly what you were talking about. And so, because I feel a bit sad that I missed a lot of the Portuguese content. Like, one of the reasons I'm here is to learn about Portuguese cities and Brazilian cities. So I think if there's more emphasis on the slides, that might be very helpful. And you know, I'm from a colonial country too, so I think that there could have been really fruitful discussion between Brazil and Australia, but it just wasn't possible because I couldn't get the depth. But your slides were brilliant. That was a great example of how to do it.
Yeah, it was. Some of the people didn't warn us, so we only found out that their slides were also in Portuguese or Spanish when they were presented. This was a problem because we couldn't just take them out of the, But maybe in the future we will stress that it's mandatory. That if you're not presenting in English, then at least the slides have to be. Because we don't want people to feel that it's a shame that so many interesting conversations have been missed for so many participants because the slides aren't in English. Okay, so you guys agree that this is a common feeling. We'll take that into very serious consideration. Because we don't want to exclude also people that don't know how to speak another language. But at the same time, maybe what we do is, we can do is like prepare a small committee to help people that don't know how to do the presentations in English to at least have the slides, maybe bilingual, so they can follow and others can follow. Maybe we'll focus on that in the future. Okay. Let's start, I think. Gabriel, do you want to start your presentation?
Yep. Can you give me a heads up when it's about 5 minutes to then?
Yes. Também não é crítico, porque eles sabem que eu sou, mas era para fixe. Vou dizer à minha equipa de pressão. Yes, okay, we're starting at 5. We have 15 minutes.
Well, so good morning, everybody. Thanks for coming at such an early hour. I'm feeling sleepy, so I'll try my best to talk to you guys about an interesting phenomenon that me and my advisor found. And this phenomenon is that São Paulo, as a city, is represented in several different ways, depending on who is trying to convey the project or the message about the city. And we found that while the government portrays São Paulo in a certain specific way, and in general, a more view of the city that is like a very global, dynamic, rich city, we know that this is a view and a representation that does not apply to the city as a whole. We thought that we could even call this an imagined city and establish a category for this representation that was the imagined city. On the other hand, we have spaces on the city that differ so greatly from these representations and from our own experience and our own symbolic capabilities of representation that these spaces we found to be unimaginable. And we can't really convey what happens and what goes on in these spaces because we don't have the adequate symbolic means. So what I'm going to try to do here is show you a little bit about these two categories, the imagined and the unimaginable cities. That's what we call them. And I think the best way to show you the imagined city would be to show you a video that our previous mayor, Beaubourg, took to Saudi Arabia to start one of the biggest privatization programs in our recent history. So it's basically selling the city, and this is how he's selling the city. I don't see the point.
You might be able to see it behind you on the screen.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh. If we can do that coordinated.
So this is basically how most people view São Paulo. It's always images of skylines, images of our parks, lots of very big numbers financially, in terms of population, in terms of movement. We have great infrastructure, lots of Air Force technology, lots of companies are based there. And basically it's a view of a very modern city. And it is essentially a global city, I think, in all possible senses of that expression. We have lots of billionaires in the city. And this is a conception that most people from outside of Brazil have of São Paulo, and that most Brazilians have of São Paulo as well. It's a very rich, a very dynamic city that is always on the move, that is always producing richness and knowledge and things like that. And this would be the mainstream view of São Paulo. The problem is that this description of São Paulo, this representation of São Paulo, which is the big city with the skyline, the lights, the technology, I live in this building, by the way, is only applicable to a very small part of the city. This almost, what you could almost see as a cross in the middle is the city of São Paulo, and the others, there are other cities around it that form the metropolitan area. A very strong metropolitan dynamic in this region. And this green area is the expanded center of the city. It is contained by the two rivers and some of the main highways that we have interlinking the north and the south of the city. And on that green area, that description applies. It really is, the city is like that. But outside this green area, we have a whole different face to the city. Most of the Paulistas live in cities like this. And São Paulo is also like this. It's a different standard of urbanization, a peripheral standard of urbanization, basically of self-built houses, very flexible, to say the least, urban legislation and urban standards, very narrow, sometimes very narrow streets, very narrow sidewalks, with power lines, sometimes are regular, sometimes are irregular. And this is how most of the Paulistas live. This is what people see as the periphery of São Paulo. So that initial description could be called an imagined city. It corresponds so far, but it doesn't correspond to the whole of the city or even the largest part of the city. The problem is there are some parts of the city, and these red parts here are the subnormal settlements that Raquel referred to in the first day of the seminar. And about 2.8 million people live in these subnormal settlements in the metropolitan region. And in some of these, and not few, but in some of these, we have very, very poor living conditions. And we are talking about unpaved roads, terrains that have risk of landslides or flooding, contaminated terrain, and not only self-built houses, but very improvised housing with lots of unstable materials, absolutely no sanitation, no running water, no garbage collection. People do not have addresses, so they can't apply for loans. They frequently can't get jobs because they don't have any real addresses. And there are thousands, millions of people living in conditions like this in a city that is the same city that you saw in the video, with the latest technology and with the highest GDP in the country. And even if you think about the very experience of being in a place like that and living in a place like that, this is a very dehumanizing experience. You can imagine elderly people, people with reduced mobility, children, every day climbing hundreds of steps like these. If you can picture it, when it rains, these pipes here are sewage pipes, and lots of them are open. So the sewage drains through the stairs, and people are always in contact with contaminants, with open sewage. Houses like this, which are very, very small, I think the size of 2 of these tables, built with pieces of plywood, pieces of cardboard, pieces of billboards. They are sometimes homes to whole families, and this is a relatively small family compared to what we see in these communities. And people who live in these houses, they are very vulnerable to weather conditions. They don't know if, when they go to sleep, if it rains, it will rain on them or not. They have very poor ventilation because they don't have windows, and most of the time the houses are very cramped together. Since they don't have floors, it's just a dirt floor, sewage creeps in the houses, insects, animals like rats, and you can imagine what it's like to put your kids to bed, sometimes in the same bed as you, and they might be bitten by a rat in the night. Or people going to work and not even knowing if their house will be there when they come back, because not only the houses are unstable, but they always risk of being removed, because these are very unstable settlements. And these are living conditions that are similar to the ones we had over 100 years ago. And people are still living in these conditions. And the experience of these spaces is, I tried to describe it to you, this experience with pictures and a couple of words, but it simply does not suffice. You can only start to understand and start to imagine what it's like when you actually go to one of these settlements, and when you talk to the families that live there, then you might begin to understand the depth of the problem that we have in these settlements in São Paulo and in the rest of Brazil. São Paulo has the biggest number of these settlements. So we found that this was an unimaginable part of the city. And we couldn't really convey the experience of these spaces to people because in São Paulo, in Brazil, we have a very stereotypical vision of favelas. And this is not only to the general public, but also to the people who work with favela research. My advisor and I are based at FAO, which is one of the most politically active architecture schools in São Paulo. And even there, in postgraduate levels, the discussions that happen about favelas are about favelas that look like this. People assume that a favela is like the favelas in Rio, or the more consolidated favelas in São Paulo. So this applies to movies, to books, to theater, to academic studies. And the problem is that these favelas, they exist, they have tons of problems, they deserve lots of attention, but they are light years ahead of the situation in those other favelas. And when we do projects and do research based on this conception of the favelas, we simply cannot begin to address those issues that people have in these other settlements. I think the layout is a bit changed a little bit, but the need for symbolic means to represent representations and their role as means of power, they are not new. Harvey talked a lot about this. We have lots of research that show that this is not a subjective experience. These representations have deep anthropological roots, and they are perpetuated by the practices that we have, for example, in academia, and in these descriptions that the government portrays of our city. And we see in Brazil that the experience of access to higher education or to circles of power is still a very privileged experience. It's very, very limited. And both of these spaces, the spaces of power and the spaces of knowledge, are still a very long distance away from those spaces that you saw in the pictures from the favelas and from their inhabitants. I believe that there might be two ways to start addressing this distance and bringing these two realities together. And the first one, and I think the most effective one, would be with inclusive access policies, like racial, economic, or even territorial quotas. We started in Brazil with racial quotas and socioeconomic quotas, but it's a very incipient policy yet, and we still need to investigate this a whole lot further. But while this doesn't happen, which it needs to happen, in my opinion at least, we can also work with extension programs and outreach programs to bring the people in the university and these spaces and put them in contact with this reality. So this was my experience. This was how I came in contact with this situation, and it was through a work that I had with an NGO that worked in these types of vulnerable slums. And I believe this is very important because we might start to bridge the gap between these two realities, and maybe with adequate means of representation, we can actually begin to address these issues in public policy and address these issues in our research. And so that's it. Thank you, and I hope we can discuss this further.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, for Paulo. JOANA BRAGA arrived. She's there hidden in the corner. But listen. Não, ah, não sei se queres fazer tu isso, mas posso fazer tu isso.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for being here after this fascinating conference dinner. My name is Beaubourg. I'm from Hungary. I'm teaching at the Budapest University of Technology and Economics at the Department of Philosophy and History of Science. In my presentation, I would like to take a talk about my 1 year long research. Of this research, main goal was to make a clarification in the notions between socialist realism and socialist modernism in this Eastern European region. So the title of my presentation is Living and Liveable Utopia, Socialist Realism in Eastern Central European City Planning. And I choose this motto, which describes very well the ideological situation which was dominated after World War II in this whole Eastern European region. Since the objective materials conditions are now ready for the construction of a higher society, an ideology is born which is the only one capable of explaining the events of history, rather history means reality. This was said by Major, who was a famous Hungarian architect after World War II. So here you can see the table of content of this presentation. First, I would like to speak about the meaning of this Eastern Central European region, because there are different notions. What could it be? The meaning of Eastern Central European. And I choose the most strict definition, the Visegrad countries. After the Second World War, Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Hungary. There are wider definitions, of course, but I'm going to focus on these countries. I'm a theorist originally, an art history researcher and a philosopher, so this will be a theoretical presentation. So first of all, I would like to make a distinction between the ideal and the utopian concept of the city. And I would like to apply this distinction for the Eastern European city planning aspect of Utopia. Okay, and after that, I'm going to speak about the socialist realism, an extremely theoretical utopian approach of these mentioned countries. But first of all, the original Stalinist model, which was begun after World War I. After that, the concept and practice of the Soc model, so the socialist model in Utopia, the new machine cities, and the precast house block system. After that, I would like to make or speak about the concept of the polar city. It could be the solution of these problems which were generated of the ideology based on architecture of this region. So a few words about the common history of these Visegrad countries after World War II. These countries were under the influence of the Soviet Union, politically and ideologically as well. So after World War II, in the periods in the region under the Soviet regime were three different era. The first years of the renovation after World War II, after that the years of the dogmatism. This is the most ideologically based era, and after that the mass housing order. And in this presentation I'm going to focus the second and the third year. The years of dogmatism in the period of socialist realism, when these mentioned countries were under the influence of this new Soviet ideology. the mass housing project, so the prefabricated household systems need the paradigm shift from this neoclassicism of the socialist realism to the architecture of the great numbers, which means this household systems. So the theoretical framework which I used for this research and for this presentation, I made a distinction between the ideal city and the utopian city. You can see the distinction of this table. And I think the main goal of the socialist realist cities was to combine these two concepts, only the advantages of the ideal and the utopian concept of the city, without the disadvantages. So in the era of Liveable, the concept of prefabricated household system would be more perfected version of the socialist realist model. And this was the beginning of the dawn of the real Eastern Central European utopia. Few words about the original socialist realism. Here we can see the Soviet type of skyscraper with the famous first side of this ideology. So, as I mentioned, it was begun after World War I, and this was the radical critique by the state against the avant-garde art and the abstract art. And this new ideology, of course, was based on the philosophy and ideology of Marxism and Leninism. And the main goal was to symbolize and to express with tools of architecture the power of the state. We have to feel everywhere in the city the power of the state. That's quite now. Okay. The original Stalinist model. This is my classification, which I was working during this research project. And it's important because there's a mixture in the public opinion and among experts. What does it mean, socialist realism and postmodern? Because the political system was the same, but there was a paradigm shift under the socialist era between two sides. So I made this classification because we have to make different levels, different layers of this Soviet type urban design. The first is the original Stalinist model, which was dominated only in the Soviet Union after World War I. The second level is the process of renovation of the buildings, for example, Warsaw. The third era was the socialist realism, which was finished by the famous architectural speech of Nikita Khrushchev at a punctual date. So these three levels related to the neoclassical style of socialist realism. And there's a fourth level, the prefabricated household systems, which model could be region-specific and the ages of application slightly different among the different countries. And I would like to speak a little bit about these two different approaches. Shortly about Czechoslovakia. So there's a special nickname, a slang term for the socialist realism, SORELA, in Czechoslovakia. Here we can see dates. And I choose this quotation to symbolize the ideological-based architectural methods. Through 5 years of war and the years of stagnation and crises that followed, it was huddled up and metamorphosed inside a technique from which emerged the colorful battle cry of a new art. Do we want to give it a name? Well, it's socialist realism and it's Czechoslovak. So we see the main ground of the socialist realism with the motto, national informed by social and socialist by the content. And here is an example, a case study from Czechoslovakia, Nova Ostrava, which was built for the antithesis of the mining city of the ancient Ostrava. And the settlement was built for workers. There was a master plan for the city. which contains 3 parts: a central axis, a university building, and a train station. The situation is something similar in Poland, as we see the dates, and here is also an ideology-based approach by the government. So the situation is something similar, but they applied this national front to their own cultural and historical heritage in Poland as well. For this could be the example Nowa Huta, which means in English new smeltery.
Thank you. Okay, and we can see these special structures of this kind of building style. In Hungary, the situation of course, is something similar. The motto was Socialist by content, national by form, as in the other countries as well. Hungary chose the neoclassicism for the national architecture. There was a great architectural debate at these years. So in what style should we build? This was the question, like at the end of the 19th century. The case study here could be an original Hungarian socialist realist city, Stalin city. Nowadays we renamed this city. The motto here, the expression of the new socialist conceptual content in every urban element. So this was the ground of this new city. Okay, this is the famous industrial building speech by Nikita Khrushchev. And with this speech, the socialist realism finished. And a new age remerged, the era of the new machine cities, the precast house block systems. And this was also emerged in Poland, in Czechoslovakia, and in Hungary as well. In Hungary, I carried with also a case study, Salgótarján, which is nowadays also existing, a heavy industrial city, which was built by the architects of the era with this new modern style after the socialist realism. It's really interesting, and there are lots of problems nowadays because the heavy industrial buildings doesn't exist nowadays, and these are in the center of the city, so we have to give a new concept for the city because there are lots of problems. And I think the solution could be the application of the Polish city concept made by Colin Rowe, who said a city cannot be planned to be a unit because various efforts prevail in it. In city planning, the monolithic scientific rationality of political will will work. The best way is the method of bricolage. So this could be a solution, and it means the unity of various kinds of knowledge and creative abilities. So to conclude, Rowe is against the utopian and ideological architecture theory of the Le Corbusier-based new machine cities, where the flat is the machine of the living and the cities to put these living machines together for these skyscrapers. And my conclusion, what I did in this research and what I would like to talk about in this presentation, so the different periods of urban design after World War II in Eastern Central Europe during the socialist realist era. I mentioned the basic level, the Stalinist model, the renovational period, and what I focused on the third era, the socialist realism, which was dominant due to the industrialization speech of Khrushchev, the fourth level. So this opens the door for the fourth level, the prefabricated house blocks. We saw different appearances of this concept of the utopia in Poland, Czechoslovakia, and Hungary. I would like to illustrate my presentation with case studies, Nova Ostrava, Nowa Huta, and Stalin City, nowadays called Dunaújváros. And I would like to speak about the second utopian approach, which was after the Khrushchevian paradigm shift. the fabricated house block systems, Slovak version Panelák, and the Bloky, and about Hungarian heavy industrial city Salvatorian. And I think the most important thing could be the solution, because there are lots of problems with this hard historical heritage and hard ideological content, because we have to use these cities, we have to live in these houses. So I think nowadays issue for the urban designers is how could we find a constructive solution to this real urban problem which affects to the Beaubourg region. The first step of solution might not be an urban but a theoretical paradigm shift due to suggested bricolage theory, which was formulated by Colin Rowe in the 1960s against this utopian city planning theory grounded by the Corbusier. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, Cassandra now.
Sorry. Our participant who's doing a Skype. Hi everybody. I'm Cassandra Fontana. I'm a PhD in the UAV University in Venice. Actually, I'm at the beginning of my research, so any suggestions and critiques will be most welcome. Today, I will talk to you about the concept of utopia itself and the different interpretations of this concept and how they apply in this intentional community I've been working on lately. I decided to begin this presentation to quote Lefebvre. His thoughts have been part of our reflections since the very first day of our conference. So I thought it would have been a good way to start. When Lefebvre stated, in order to extend the possible, it is necessary to proclaim and desire the impossible, I think he expressed with a great lucidity the possibility to interpret utopia not just as an abstract picture, but as a lever of change with great emancipatory capacities. Following this line of thought, utopia can become a device, a lever, useful tool for the expression of critical observation and for the consequent exhortation for social change, as well as for the definition of alternatives and the potential paths towards them. But I'd like to do a step back and retrace briefly the interpretation of this concept. And to do so, I want to quote David Harvey. He said that More's utopia is an artificially created island which functions as an isolated, coherently organized, and largely closed-space economy. The internal spatial ordering of the island strictly regulates a stabilized and unchanging social process. Put cruelly, spatial form controls temporality, and imaginative geography controls the possibility of social change and history. It is precisely the gradual reintroduction of time and processuality within the reasoning around the concept of utopia that inspired me the most. Historically, utopias based on idea of perfection has been often characterized by a definition of the space that, with a sort of architectural determinism, would have better host the utopian society. The static character of many utopias, the idea of perfection incapable of rearticulating over time, and the important warnings given by the totalitarian drifts of the first half of the past century, fueled the development of a vast body of criticism, mainly based on the recognition of how the logical equation utopia equal perfectibility equal imposition could give form to the potential relation between utopia and violence. But then, given the recognition of these potential drifts, what does it mean to reintroduce time and processuality within the reasoning about utopia and its space? It is between the 60s and the 70s that several contributions attempted a reinterpretation, a rehabilitation of this concept, bringing to light its prominently critical and processual character. The 70s represent a phase of change not only in the light of the emergence of the utopian studies as a separate academic field, but also as a reaction to the political turmoil of those years. Again, Lefebvre can help us understanding the events of 1968 Paris, which he defined as a concrete utopia. The importance given by several contemporary authors to the critical and concrete dimension of utopia, and therefore to the capacity of rearticulating over time, emerged under the idea that only remaining open, utopia would be able to guide action, to push individuals to experiment. In the critical utopia, the attitude of the inhabitants has also changed. They are no longer passive followers of order, but individuals who are actively involved in the creation of possible alternatives. Although the attention toward change plays a fundamental role in both perfect and critical utopias, the mechanisms at work to implement such a change are different. As Newman recalls, the first is characterized by the fantasy of achieving some sort of social harmony, whether through the idea of the rational functioning market or through communist modes of organization. Utopias, based on idea of perfection, have to constantly face the structural impossibility of achieving such harmony, and therefore will keep producing new political identification and renew attempts to grasp social totality. On the other hand, critical utopias, in the interpretation of Moyland, have to be understood as powerful drive for the critical reflection on the limits of our world. So Moyland and many other authors with him, rather than seeing utopia as a rational plan for a new social order, looks at it as an educational desire, a tool to desire better, to desire more, and to desire in a different way. These utopias are active, playful, or experimental articulation of the imagination. Experiments that are self-critical and reflexive, and contain internal processes for rearticulation of the multiple different hopes and desires. This interpretation of utopia can bring us back to Lefebvre. In his thought, imagination and exploration are the pillars of a process that advances by trial and error, and which he called experimental utopia, which is the exploration of human possibilities with the help of the image and the imagination, accompanied by the incessant criticism and the incessant reference to the problem posed by the reader. Liveable Utopia is therefore immanent and potential, and at the same time practiced and real. The link highlighted by Moylan between the autonomous social movement and by Sargison between utopia and intentional communities looked at the utopian in its materiality, highlighting the dialectical form between theory and practice. In both cases, the emphasis given to the experimental dimension, whether the everyday life is a fundamental element, opens to a broader reflection. If utopia is not simply a place, then it is a practice. It's what Moylan states. I personally approached the concept of utopia thanks to the literature about intentional communities and back to the land movements that have been extensively interpreted as places where people try alternatives and to live their dreams on a daily basis. From my understanding, these experiments, I'm referring here mostly to intentional communities, are often characterized by delimitation of boundaries of influence, by the definition of a specific place capable of being circumscribed as its own space. But then, if we embrace the interpretation of utopia as experimental everyday practice, then the understanding of the space that utopia produces becomes way more complicated. For example, if we join the concept of everyday utopias with the one of communities of practices, then of course the identification of the limited space might fade away. As I told you, my interest in the concept of utopia was moved by the reading of many authors that have interpreted intentional communities as concrete utopias. And as I was interested at that time on the relationship between ethic and practice in a broad sense. In the last year, I then decided to live 4 months in a very unique intentional community, which is called Auroville. 5 minutes, okay, so I have to. You might ask yourself why this community can be called unique. Behind me, there is one of the documents that are based on the vision, that are part of the vision of this community. This community is based in Tamil Nadu, in India, and was founded in 1968, following the thought of one of the most important Indian modern philosophers, Sri Aurobindo. Both the inspirer, Aurobindo, and the founder, which is called the mother, died a long time ago, and the community members over the past decades had to put into practice huge goals, as you can see. They are actually trying to create a community which is based on equality between humans, no money, a kind of education that is not based on certificates, but it's based on everyone's expressing, let's say, its best qualities but what is this community today? It is a community of almost 2,700 individuals of all ages that come from 50 different countries around the world. The initial idea was to create a city that was independent from any national state, with 50,000 residents. Already, the idea was to have all those residents already in 1990, with 4 functional zones, following an idea of planning really well, based mostly on zoning. But then reality now is very much different. It's an experiment recognized by the central government of India, since the 80s, the government supports this community both in an economic way, but also in an administrative way. Let's say there is a special immigration status for the residents and also for the long-term visitors of the community. Well, I cannot deepen here the effects of the institutionalization of this project, which was initially based on a strong anarchic spirit, because I want to go back to the space that Utopia produces. This social experiment, I think, is very exemplary of the clashes between perfect and critical utopia. In Auroville, when looking at the processes of space production, and here Liveable comes again, we can recognize how the process of making Auroville's utopia concrete is interpreted by many community members as strongly intertwined by the implementation of initial vision, also in terms of spatial planning. While on the other hand, we have the attempt to abandon any blueprint vision toward a more incremental open process. I understood that in this community, the two previously described epistemological vision of utopia has a blueprint or has a process, coexist, interact, and constrain each other. Behind me, you can see a sketch where in orange there are highlighted the streets, the only streets that have been built actually according to the plan. All the rest is not, and within the community members there are big clashes about whether to fulfill that plan or not. Well, in this community, I think that there are those extremes and their projection on the space have restrained a long time the development of a shared vision about the spatial organization of the community. Given the not hierarchical internal organization, and therefore the impossibility for the Auroville Town Development Council to impose any decision on the community, the planning process is today following a really illogical rationality, because again, the attempt to strictly follow on one hand the initial idea is facing the disapproval of many community members that would rather abandon any idea of city itself toward a kind of settlement more in line with the idea of an eco-village. Oversimplifying then, well, this is actually just to show you one very controversial project. As you can see below, it would be a huge building in a context that is actually now characterized by a very low density, and this building is of course part of the initial plan. Well, this is instead the reality. This is where the small hut is where I used to live, and below there is the kitchen. So you can easily understand how big is the distance between these two visions. So in this context, I think we can recognize both tendencies toward crystallization of a spatial imaginative form and toward the complete abandonment of any formal spatial planning in favor of a spontaneous development. I actually, what I found out is that this was the most conflicting issue within the community, like which kind of vision they wanted to put forward, and the result is like some sort of not changing situation. But I think that in this context, the processes of space production, both from above and below, are able to stimulate a reflection on the planning processes in general and their potential impositive character. Therefore, I think that this community could be an exemplary case to look at the relation between fixity and spontaneity because of the social economy that characterizes it. So, as I told you, this is just the beginning for me, and of course any suggestions and critics will be most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, hello everyone, I'm Cecilia Di Marco, I'm an architect and I am PhD in urbanism. And at the moment I'm working as a postdoctoral research at the School of Architecture of Grenoble in France. Our main research activity is on the field of healthy city planning and focusing on particularly British initiatives and projects. Today I will talk about the Garden City Utopia and how it can be reinterpreted as an urban model for cities to provide a healthier lifestyle. The presentation, it will be composed of 3 parts. In the first one, I will present the utopia of Garden City. In the second one, I will show the currently British urban issues. And in the third one, I will analyze a case study of a new garden city, which is building nowadays in the UK. At the end of the 19th century, following the industrialization process, in most European countries, a large number of people moved from countryside to cities. Their living conditions were terrible. The houses were very bad, they didn't have sunlight, fresh air or clear system. They lived in poor hygienic conditions, which clearly impact very bad on their health, contributing to early death. In order to answer to this terrible public health situation, there were a number of architectural and urban experiments led by philanthropic industrialists with the aim of building new neighborhoods to improve the living condition of the workers. For example, William Lever in Port Sunlight and George Cabri in Bournville tried their utopic project. With this project, they propose an alternative to the overcrowded and polluted city. Among these utopic experiments, one of the best known is the Garden City project by Howard. He tries to solve the problem of industrialized society, suggesting a new model of town. His idea was to create a place to live in which all the advantages of the town life, such as his energy and his work opportunity, were merged in a perfect combination with all the beauty and delight of the countryside. In contrast to the industrial cities, his new urban model proposed to put health at the center of urban planning, with the creation of a plan for a city that would combine the services of urban life with ready access to nature, typical of rural environment. He explained his idea through the well-known diagram number 1, the 3 magnets. 2 magnets represent the features of town and country life to draw people to themselves. The third one is the garden city, and it represents a new alternative type of life. In his book, Garden City of Tomorrow, Howard proposed the creation of an utopic urban region composed by a series of small compact cities with a limited population and surrounded by a wide green belt made to prevent the city's unlimited extension. The cities will be linked by public transport. The small size of towns would offer walkable neighborhoods and close proximity between home, services and workplace. The Garden City model proposes a new organization of the society based on the community ownership of land that contribute to a more equal environment where everybody gives back to the community and where the municipality makes decisions for the good of the citizen. The garden city model can be found in a long tradition of utopias and in the realm of particular urban planning. Howard's utopia of a perfect city was planned in his book, shaped as a scenario in a diagram, and became a plan and a real production. The architects and planner, Onin and Parker, were chosen to translate Howard's idea in an innovative master plan. They were in charge to design the first garden city of Letchworth and some years later a second garden city in Welland. Both cities were built very much on the lines Howard advocates, with wide green belt around the core of the city, a limited population and community administration. Unfortunately, the vision of a large-scale system was never realized, and the cities remained two single experiments, and the idea of a network of towns never took place. Over the last decades, the British government has been confronted to two main urban issues. On one hand, the housing crisis. More than 200,000 new households are expected to form every year between 2011 and 2033. And the price for a dwelling is very high and can reach 3 times the salary. On the other hand, British government is questioning about the relationship between urban design and lifestyle disease. In fact, some reports underline that in Britain, over 1/3 of children are overweight, and by 2030, about 45% of the adult population will be obese. We also know that people are living longer and longer, and that the population is more and more exposed to the increase of chronic disease and long-term ills. Moreover, British government analyzed that the cut of the cost of healthcare can pass through the improving of housing conditions and a better urban planning. In this context, the garden city utopia might be a suitable answer to these problems. To explore this hypothesis, the British government is proposing initiatives to support the creation of new communities based on garden city principles. In particular, the garden city model is considered as a breakdown in previous trend and practice, and as an alternative to the current urban model. Now I will present you the case study of Ebbsfleet. Ebbsfleet area, which is in red line, is very well situated because it is in the east of London, on the south of the Thames Estuary, and on the north of the Green Belt of Kent. The site was a brownfield constituted of a charcoal quarry and industrial sites. And to reactivate this area, in 2007, an international rail station was inaugurated, opening up a high-speed service to London, which is just 20 minutes away, and the main European capital, and becoming an important mobility hub. Nowadays, in this area is proposed a new urban project for 30,000 new homes. The government has set up a development corporation as a planning authority with the aim of coordinating the development of a new garden city for this area. In addition, thanks to its features of better livability, the project has been chosen as a demonstrator site for the Healthy New Town program. I have analyzed whether the project of Ebbsfleet Garden City was really respect the principle of Howard's Utopia and could be in fact considered as a garden city for the 21st century. I have compared the features of the new project of Ebbsfleet with those of the first garden city of Letchworth. As it happened in Letchworth, one of the main objectives of Ebbsfleet project is to provide affordable home for everyone with the low energy consumption and high quality standards. According to Howard's idea, the city will be composed of sociable neighbors with shop and community facility. The different neighbors will be linked each other by public transport. Each small center will provide the primary services at walkable distance. The settlement will be surrounded by a green belt for leisure and sport activity. Moreover, some projects of urban agriculture are set up in these green areas. The green belt will provide also the possibility to connect the different neighborhoods by cycling to increase the active mobility. As ours proposed, the city will provide a close proximity between home, services and workplace to achieve a better work-life balance and avoid commuting. In the end, one of the most important principles of a garden city was the community life and the engagement of citizens in cultural and administration life. EBSFLIT project promote active community life, but one big difference between Letchworth and EBSFLIT is the ownership of land, because if in Letchworth the citizens were the owner of the land, in EBSFLIT the land is owned by a private urban developer that will make their profit. So we have observed that EBSFLIT follows a lot of the garden city principles, and that this project could be an important reference to a new urban model in which the well-being of the citizen, their health and the community feeling are the heart of the project. Planning new garden settlement can really provide a better environment and a healthier lifestyle. Moreover, these kind of places are not just urban commuted hub, but offer new opportunity for economic development. However, this project cannot respect one of the main principles of garden city, that is the citizen ownership of the land and the redistribution of land value for the benefit of the community. EBSFLIT Garden City is not the only project in this direction. In Britain there are a lot of projects coming up as new garden village, garden town or garden city. So we're wondering whether these projects are really based on garden city principle or are just marketing strategy, and whether they can really answer to the housing crisis, offering affordable house for everyone. I would like to thank my groups for the supporting in this research and all of you for the attention.
So now we have Harold, who is going to present via Skype. Autorização. Por que autorização? Não sabe no mídia? Isto no mídia? Não, mas no mídia. Dentro de isto agora mesmo. No mídia. Isto a partir de Harold, can you hear us?
Yes, very roughly.
Oh my god, I can't believe this word. Okay, great.
Okay.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry I cannot be there.
No problem. We're happy to have you on video conference. So, do you have a screen you want to share with us, or are you gonna?
Yes. of course, I just have to prove that actually, I'm hearing and listening to myself. It's very dark today.
Sorry?
I am, it's like an echo, right?
Oh, yeah, but that will end when I turn off the mic.
Okay. So, is it okay? Are you seeing the?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Okay. So, I will just put it in. So I am. I wanted to understand that is. I'm sorry, I'm listening to myself. I don't know if we can put up something.
Is it better?
I don't. Okay, so it's much better now. Sorry. So I wanted to present you this this project, which I'm working on for some months. It's called Utopias, and well, I named it for the presentation in Lisbon. So actually, it's about Paulo in Paris. But what I wanted to do for this presentation was actually to concentrate not much on the architecture or the urban context of the center, but most especially to rediscover a bit sort of the context in which it was conceived and how ideas that were not directly connected or to the center or let's say transversal to it were very important at the times, and now everything has just like flattened, and we sort of forgot about it. So in Paris, of course, you know that in the last months there have been like commemorations of the 50-year anniversary of May '68, and Saint-Pompidou is actually one of the consequences of this very important social uprising. So the presentation will be divided into 5 parts. The first one is real fantasies, or the transposition of utopia. So basically it's just a introduction, like a theoretical introduction of how I managed the topic of the theme of utopia. So I'm bringing François Choé, and who says that actually the utopia is a 3-part has a 3-part structure where there is its founding. It's in a critique of an existing society which is archaic and is not representing the contemporary society that is, of course, criticizing it. Then we have a new society that is opposed to it, point by point. And in the middle of it, there is a model, a built space that is modeled and in order to support the institutions that should enable the enacting of this utopia. So this is sort of like a very interesting connection with urbanism And Jean Baudrillard is actually adding up some interesting insight on this, more or less at the same time that Choi, saying that it might seem a bit teleological, but he says that once in Utopia, there's two possibilities. Either Utopia remains a fantasy and nothing happens, it just influences society in a very direct way. Either it's actually built, it's transposed into reality, and then eventually this utopia, this realized utopia, will become itself a matter of criticism of a new society that it creates. So it's sort of like a loop where utopia will cancel itself, become archaic, and a new utopia will pop up. So this is sort of like the model. Might seem a bit caricaturistic, but it's like that. And then what we have in the city is that once we have forgotten all of this ideology that surrounds utopia, we just have, as Shoei says, buildings that lost its semiological sense. So, and just a reminder, I'm sure that we all know this, but just the role of imagination and fantasy into urbanism, how we do owe a lot in urbanism to the very creative ideas, especially in the 19th and 20th century, of fantasies, of urban fantasies, in order to give us an insight of what the city should be or what our society should be. So an example is, a very clear example of the transposition of utopia is New York. Here I cite CASSANDRA, so we have a very powerful image of a fantastic or a very just an impossible thing that sort of transposes into an architectural typology and an urban morphology, but also into a way in which a society is not supposed to live, but lives on. So this is the Downtown Athletic Club in Manhattan, which is cited because of its ridiculousness. But in this ridiculousness, we can see the guys who are eating oysters, and there is also an athletic club. So it's actually the idea of Manhattanism. Now these ideas actually were taken into consideration and influenced very deeply the creation of what the city is today. So now I will talk about France. Especially, I would like to contextualize the system in question during the times of the creation or the conception of Centre Pompidou, which is, of course, the Gaullist France. So, as you might know, France after the war, during the 50s, was ruled by General de Gaulle, and he was just a representation of a France that after 1945 probably couldn't exist anymore, with a very positivistic government that was always thinking about, or a very pragmatic government was thinking about progress and how the height of industrial society was giving this welfare of France, but it was actually a France who was in a deeply cultural crisis. It was losing all of its empire. The whole cultural institution and the world that France was part of was being reduced as much as it was the British world. It was just a reminder of of what used to be after the war. So, especially in Paris, this was very clear in the way that Paris was developing with all of these positivistic ideas of progress in the height of the industrial society. And here we have the peripheral boulevard, which is probably one of the most aggressive interventions into the Parisian landscape during this time, during this era. But at the same time, during the 60s, the let's say scholars and people in the high cultural world started to understand that this model was not actually giving the promises that it was being built for. So what we have here is a crisis. It's a crisis on aesthetics, on industrial aesthetics, or post-war industrial aesthetics, let's say, and a crisis that probably comes from a much deeper cultural crisis in general that France and in general the world was living. So this is where urbanism and architects play an interesting role in the way that they started to imagine how technology and how this height of technology and of mechanization of this era could be used to actually propose an alternative society. So we have ARTUR in the UK, of course, and in France, particularly, we have exercises like that of JOANA, and in spatial Utopia, we have JOANA Friedman. But also we have a much more contestatory, politically involved utopias or responses, such as international situationist, and we have all of these maps of psychogeography that started to put into question the modern urbanism. And we have, of course, other type of experiments, much more fantastic. Actually, this is from Fluxus, who explored the power of architecture between the art world. So all of this context explodes into May 68, and I took some very interesting quotes from the archive in Paris. And number 2, for example, it says a lot on the ideas that were going on, sort of radicalism of the ideas that were going on in this era. So utopists are those who confirm with changing social structures, we will change the spirit of men. I'm sorry if it's a bit sketchy, the translation is mine. But basically, what we can see is that there existed a very fast uprising against the authoritarianism of de Gaulle and its government, and something that the government was not expecting, and that as it came up, the uprisings, it also disappeared very fast. It was just 1 month in May of '68. But in this context, we have the university and the students that are actually thinking and are daring to change education and the modes in which education was strictly bourgeois was changing or should change into a more open and flexible system, and also how other cultural institutions that were very archaic, like theater, should be reconsidered into a much, or at least updated into a much modern mode of thinking. So, about Beaubourg, I just wanted to show this. This is, probably you know this is Monte Verita. I just wanted to come back into the spatial nature of Utopia. So Utopia, we have that either fantastic, so into a fantastic frame, or either into a framework that is real, but it's very limited, starts to operate inside these self-imposed limits and start to produce unexpected or experimental modes of socializing or modes of inhabiting. So this is Monte Verita, which is a society, a utopian society in Switzerland during the beginning of the century, which sort of embodies this idea of realized utopia within the framework of a hotel in the canton, in an Italian canton of Switzerland. And this was also reivindicated by the French May and by the barricades particularly, where inside the barricades they started to let's say melt down all of the titles that they had as students or workers or whatever they were just people, and starting to explore a different society. So going back to De Gaulle and to Paris, basically they knew that, as they very well knew from the past, from Osman, they knew that they had to instrumentalize urbanism in order to bring back control in the aftermath of '68. So we have here Leal, which is the ancient, or not very ancient, but the 19th century pavilions of the Paris market, which was a fantastic work by ARTUR. And we have here, if you can see, the Plateau de Beaubourg. Beaubourg was a very old neighborhood, and basically, as some scholars have said, Middle Ages in Paris didn't end with Osman. It ended actually with Saint-Pompidou. So the whole tissue of Beaubourg and of the whole Marais was actually very medieval and very deteriorated, very antique, made up of small alleyways full of atelier and
Harold, sorry, just to please let you know that we are almost running out of time for having a discussion afterwards. So if you can use a bit more, 2 minutes, 3 minutes to wrap it up, we would appreciate it. Okay? Thank you. I'll turn off the mic now again.
Okay. So, so basically, the Plateau de Beaubourg was this, and there were other, let's say, cultural debts that France had in this time, and Paris was the scenario. One of them was the modern art museum. Another one was a huge library that should be built from 1868 in Leal, and it never happened. So Beaubourg actually became the Saint-Pompidou became sort of magic solution in order to concentrate all of the reivindications that left May '68 into one single element. And this was probably something that the government was not intending, but it became an utopia. It became an utopia because it was unthinkable at the time that they could do all of this into one single architectural element or monster, which it was called at the time. So they wanted to put the Center for Contemporary Art, experimental gallery, design museum, everything that sort of like everything that May 68 was reclaiming. They wanted to put in a single object. So the narrative of the government was a place for creation, which was the word of Pompidou, which actually was the sort of the great question and the great utopia for Parisians at the time, who thought that it was mostly a supermarket of mass culture and a place for consumerism instead of creation or art. So the battle on Pompidou started, and basically what shocked Parisians at the time and intellectuals was that Paris was not this sort of a huge institution, but it was mostly a very organic sort of tissues where art
Harold, sorry, we really need to finish your presentation. Are you close to your conclusion?
Yes. So I wanted just to show the context of visions and how architecture became just an to embody like these new aesthetics, these very different aesthetics that were completely opposite to this very organic tissue and inspired by other undone projects like Cedric Price's Fun Palace, and well, that's it basically. How architecture is just an instrument in order to, or an unthought utopia to create all of this unexpected or unthinkable solutions for what happened at the time. So that's it basically. I wanted to show you.
Okay, thank you very much, Harold. We can now open our floor for debate. We have actually 10 minutes, a bit more. Harold, do you want to stick around to listen to the questions? Maybe there's some questions for Harold.
Yeah, yes.
Not yet. Okay. So, any other questions for other presenters? Okay.
Anyone has any questions for any one of the presenters or no?
Yeah, I would like to hear your thoughts on how these utopias work or don't work when applied to scenarios such as Latin America. I don't know if you know of our experience in Brasilia, which was basically a re-edition of these utopias, and how they didn't contemplate some of the socioeconomic inequalities that we had in Brazil at the time and we still have now, and how they aggravated lots of these inequalities. And I don't know, I would like to hear your thoughts on that.
You're talking about Brazilian?
Yeah, but I think it applies to all of the talks about utopia in general. Of the 3 first presentations.
Yeah, we had your presentation, and you were talking about what is imaginable and what is unimaginable, and how we can how we
can we adequately representing unimaginable? Sorry. Okay. So, and then I have to find your names because I don't know them, which is not so great. But then there was a presentation that we were talking on socialist realism and all the phases on the utopia applying to East European cities, and then the concept of utopia and intentional communities. And here in this one we had these two ideas of utopia. When you go to the idea of utopia like a fixed and imposed, so you aim for a destination, or utopia as a process, which then here we can open the concept of utopia. And now with this presentation, I believe that it didn't end, because then there would be this about a book, which is really interesting, which is kind of fantasy on Pompidou. And it was launched near, close to the construction of Pompidou. But I believe there is a lot of the things that we call utopia. But you were talking about how you were using utopia, I think, let me see if I understand, as a model that we will materialize, like Brasilia, because this was an amazing design, but it was out of scale, and it didn't. And with Brasilia, the city represents, even if it was not a totalitarian state then, the city represents the power of the state. And you have this plan, and people who can't afford to be on the plan, they are outside. So there's kind of even a big separation on social segregation, a big social segregation. So it's really a major example. And the architects, they were, well, communist architects, and I think this can lead us, and I won't have time, but to the modernism and all the ideas of what is a new man, and even if you are, and with this connected to Utopia, I'm not being really very assertive, but that the idea that you plan a society and you define the rules, and the transposition to materiality and to reality of a project like this, I think it's always problematic. But I don't know many examples in Latin America. But, well, maybe there's a lot, yeah. But so, any other question?
Thank you. I've got a question to Cecilia. Thank you for your talk. It was really interesting, your case study of this garden city related to London. And I'm really curious about the inhabitants. Could we know something about the inhabitants of this garden city?
Actually, the project is not yet finished, so there are not so many inhabitants yet there, but they are some, and they are quite happy about the new neighbors, because as I try to show you, they are more than just a suburb common hub. So they have some services in the neighbors, they have a lot of pedestrian path to reach the services, and they are in close proximity to London. But the project is not yet finished, so we can't say if it will be really a good project or not. We cannot just judge it, because it's just one neighborhood up to 9 that is done. So.
Which class of the society is the aim to live there?
Yeah, there are some government facilities to move them. So there are some young couples that are moving there, and there are more about people coming from the region that would like to live in London, but they can't afford to live in London, so they are moving in this new town. So they are more or less all the type of people. No, not only rich people. Okay.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I wanted to see it.
Well, regarding what you were saying, I think that the presentation that it was supposed to happen, but about Chardigan, that probably would have been very interesting regarding that, because it's actually, to me, it's actually very interesting what you were also saying, like how these plans that have behind an idea of society and an idea of like the good man also, but do not take into account social processes and time, like the change of, you know, the situations and also the needs of people, with a sort of idea that the architect, the technicians can provide solutions which will be good once for all, no? Which is related to modernism and all that. Yeah, I don't know.
According to your opinion, I was also really curious about this Le Corbusier presentation, because I think the main problem, which was based in the interval period in the architecture, that we would like to solve problems with the tools of architecture, social problems, and Alain Baudin professor said that this is not working. So we have to have another solution, and after that the using of architectural tools. So they changed something, and the living example exists in Eastern Central Europe. Not so big as Brasilia, but we have to live in that kind of utopian cities, and it doesn't work. Thank you.
I would like to comment after seeing those presentations that it's also remarkable the different representational methods of how architecture envisions society. When I was seeing the presentation about Paris, and then how the drawings from Rem Koolhaas, and there are naked men enjoying oysters, it's a very, very different image of the sexuality in the city, fetishization and joy, which is very different from the idea Le Corbusier had about what people should do and what they should enjoy. I think also, it's remarkable how the representation technique goes together with a paradigm shift of the society.
And I was very curious here, listening to your presentations, because I studied smart city discourse and practice in the context of Latin America. And it sounds a lot like a re-edition of these practices of utopian planning or total planning. And have you ever read about or studied these phenomena and the discourse of smart cities? What do you think about what do you think about that? Do you think it's similar in a way? Or?
No, I actually don't study a lot of smart cities, but maybe you can answer. I don't know.
Well, I didn't study smart city in depth, but I think that the smart city model could be looked at as a technological utopia somehow, like the idea behind that we can face all the crises that we are going through, talking about climatic and environmental, but also economic, through like finding some technical solutions. So again, in my opinion, like projects like that, models like smart cities, instead of questioning reality for real, like what utopias, the critique function of utopia is left behind, because they are not actually trying to like make a revolution somehow, change the basic of society, but just trying to find technological solutions to current issues, which makes it maybe, but it is just an idea, I don't know, maybe not even possible to say that smart city is actually a utopia if we think of utopia as something that criticizes and put the basis for revolutionary action. I don't know.
I have a question for BORBÁLA. I'm BORBÁLA, is that right? You're from Hungary, right? You were talking, the country you were mainly talking about in your presentation is Hungary? The country?
Yeah, I'm Hungarian. I would like to talk about
the whole... Yeah. Because I'm quite curious to understand what happened in the communist countries, because we all follow this modernist dreams, and over there it's supposed to answer to industrial and capitalist response for building. And in the end, it was very appropriated by the communist countries. They used it a lot to solve their problems. And I wonder, after this has passed, I think it's somehow behind us now, what kind of architecture discourse is emerging in these countries? Like, it's more, is it still this mass production, or is this star system very specific and very imagetic production, or is like the participation, the small things, what is going on in these countries now architecture-wise? What are they thinking about in architecture?
Thank you. This is a really good question. So from just an aspect from the history, every country of the mention changed the regime at the end of the 80s or the very beginning of the 90s. So there were new political systems. And of course, new kind of projects. And so I don't know what you know about the socialism. So people can't think what you want to. People can't speak what about they wanted to. They cannot travel into Western countries. And after the change, the system, so everything was possible for the people. So we know a lot of things about the smart cities. At my university, we've got a huge smart city project with intelligent traffic lights and so on. Of course, the participation is really important. nowadays because of this built heritage, which exists. So we have to rethink a lot of things. And in these countries, there's a built historical heritage. So these are old cities. Most of the huge cities were built at the end or at the second half of the 19th century. So this is also a problem, that what can we build and in what style we can build. There are lots of people against the modernism in the inner cities. In Hungary there's a new tendency that, of course, there are residential buildings and garden cities, but in the inner city it's always a problem. And a new tendency started in the last 2 years, a huge renovation of these historical buildings and a new neo style. We would like to renew ideologically as well, and in buildings this Austrian-Hungarian monarchy style, the neoclassical style. So it's a returning, yeah. So always circulating the styles, and so we were in a historic style at the end of the 19th century, and after that a modernist style. After the First World War, and after this modernism, there's against the governmental specified Baroque style, and after the Second World War, the Western modernism continues, but without any critics. So we use the Le Corbusian elements in the architecture. After that, the Socialist realism, and that finished the prefabricated house blocks. So this is a dialectical succession during the 20th century in Eastern Central Europe. So it's really interesting. I think. Thank you very much.
Well, we have to finish. I'm sorry, but it's almost 11:30, and we really have to finish. Thank you, everybody. The questions were really interesting, and I would really like to continue this, but we have a new panel afterwards. So thank you all.